Hello and welcome to this morning's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up on the program today, fresh fighting reported as Israel-Hamas truce expires. Defected son of Hamas leader calls for fathers or Hamas fighters' execution. Plus, Israel says Hamas statement on the Biber's family deaths still not verified. Thank you for joining us this morning. A temporary pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas is now at an end. Neither side announced a deal to extend the pause in fighting, which expired at 7 a.m. on Friday. An hour before the truce was set to end, Israel said it intercepted a rocket fired from Gaza, and Hamas-affiliated media reported sounds of explosions and gunfire in the Palestinian enclave. Israel's military resumed combat against Hamas in the Gaza Strip, accusing the group of violating the terms of the pause and firing toward Israeli territory. While Israel and Hamas struck a last-minute agreement to extend their ceasefire for another day and mediators pressed for talks to extend the pause in fighting, the Hamas armed wing claimed a shooting attack in Jerusalem as a response to deaths in Gaza. 2 Hamas gunmen killed 3 people at a Jerusalem bus stop during morning rush hour on Thursday, triggering Israel to reiterate its commitment to wipe out the terrorist faction. The pause in fighting halted bombings and allowed some humanitarian aid into Gaza after much of the coastal territory of 2.3 million people was reduced to wasteland in an Israeli campaign in retaliation for the deadly terror attack by Hamas terrorists. A reserve engineering officer with the IDF, Major Moshe, says in his words, "The feeling is like you're on pause. You're in the middle of a war, in the middle of our task, and we're just being paused, even though we see that the other side is not really pausing." The armed wing of Hamas, which has sworn to Israel's destruction, claimed responsibility for the Jerusalem attack on Thursday, deeming it heroic, while Israel called further proof of the need to destroy the terrorists. Israel's Shin Bet security agency identified the gunmen as 30 and 38-year-old brothers who are affiliated with Hamas, which runs Gaza, both as previously been jailed in Israel.
We are holding the defensive lines at this point, and everyone is basically preparing for the next phase. And we are all happy that we are, through diplomatic channels, if you want to call it that way, we are bringing back hostages, which is one of our main goals in this war.
The feeling is like you're on a pause. You're in the middle of a war, we're in the middle of our task, and we're just being paused, even though we see that the other side is not really pausing. We encountered a day before yesterday on a place where we actually been there, on a specific house. Someone came inside, booby-trapped it, put on RPGs inside, and cameras and explosive and clear. And this is during the ceasefire. We're not engaging right now. And for the troops, and most of them in my division, they are reserve troops. It's hard to be on a war zone when you saw someone with a weapon or aiming at you, you could fire. And right now you have this pause feeling when you're just ready and prepared, but you can't move. But of course the mission is important. Well, we do see traffic of civilian. It's not a lot like we see in other sectors, not where we're located, but some of them. I assume there are a lot of reasons why some of them are coming back. What we actually did is we put up a line where we have to distinguish between where they can move and where not to, and so that we can keep the order and peace and do as little encounters as possible. Even though we had a few also explosive or shots, but not really something that we can handle.
Now, the son of a Hamas leader who spied on the Group for Israel is asking for the death penalty on all Hamas fighters currently held in Israeli prisons. In an interview broadcast by the Israeli government, his name, Mossab Hassan Youssef, said that the death penalty should apply to all Hamas terrorists in Israeli custody, including his father, Sheikh Hassan Youssef. He claims there are hundreds of them in Israeli hands, and this punishment is the only language that Hamas understands. Mr. Youssef secretly converted to Christianity and helped the Shin Bet security services in the late 1990s and early 2000s when Hamas waged suicide bomb attacks against Israel. He was codenamed Green Prince after the Islamist color and for the fact that his father, Hassan Youssef, led Hamas in the West Bank.
No one is listening. Any harm that happens to the hostages, Israel must execute top Hamas leaders with no exceptions. There are hundreds of them in the Israeli hands. This is the only language Hamas can understand. And when I say top Hamas leaders, that includes Sheikh Hassan Youssef, no exception. He cannot just incite for violence, sending people to die, gambling with children's blood for his ideology and for his political aspirations.
Well, thank you very much, Musab. It was fascinating to hear you.
Qatar gave Hamas cover, political cover, and still do give Hamas political cover. They gave them base, they gave them money, they gave them everything they need to get to the point where they slaughtered many thousands of innocent civilians.
Now the son of a Hamas leader speaking at a conference chaired by the Israeli government spokesman Elion Levi, and now U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says he'd made it clear to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that before Israel starts its military operations in southern Gaza, it has to put protection for civilians in place, adding that the Israeli government agreed with the need for that. Mr. Blinken indicated that Israel is able to minimize harm to innocent men, women, and children because it has one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. Secretary Blinken was speaking to reporters in Tel Aviv. Mr. Blinken is in Israel during his third visit to the Middle East since the war began.
In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians. But Israel has one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. It is capable of neutralizing the threat posed by Hamas while minimizing harm to innocent men, women, and children. And it has an obligation to do so. The way Israel defends itself matters. It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war. Together with the UN, partners in the region, we have significantly increased the flow of food, water, medicine, fuel to power desalination plants, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure. We've said, and indeed I had an opportunity to discuss today with President Abbas, the need for reform, the need to revitalize, to revamp the Palestinian Authority so that it can most effectively meet the aspirations of the Palestinian people and deliver for them. There are a number of things that go into that, including, for example, reform so that it more effectively combats corruption, that it engages and empowers civil society, that it supports free press and open media, and a number of other things. Leadership choices, these are of course up to the Palestinian people.
The United States was continuing its efforts with Qatar and Egypt to extend the humanitarian pause in the Israel war with Hamas when the shooting happened in Jerusalem. The U.S. has condemned that shooting and killing of 3 people at the Jerusalem bus stop by Hamas terrorists. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said to reporters that the shooting was another example of the threat that Israel is under. Mr. Kirby assured that the U.S. will continue to support Israel's military campaign against Hamas at the end of the pause.
So we're going to continue our efforts with Israel, with Qatar, obviously with Egypt, to support and extend this pause as much as we can, and to help secure the release of all the hostages held by Hamas terrorists. And then I think we've all seen the terrible news coming out of Jerusalem, a deadly shooting attack there where at least 3 people were killed. Hamas has claimed credit. We obviously condemn this terrorist attack, this heinous violence. Just another example of the kind of threat that the Israeli people and the Israeli nation are under by Hamas. So we certainly extend our condolences and thoughts and prayers to all those affected and the family members that are now grieving, additional family members that are now grieving. So obviously we continue to believe that Israel has the right and responsibility to go after Hamas. They have spoken for their military campaign, and they have said very clearly that that when these pauses are over, they intend to go back at it. And as they make that decision, they'll continue to find support from the United States in terms of the tools and capabilities, the weapon systems that they need, as well as the advice and the perspectives that we can offer in terms of urban warfare. We do believe that that of the unaccounted for Americans, that we believe there's one other woman that's unaccounted for, and that we had believed was taken hostage. So we were hoping to see 2 women and, of course, little Abigail come out over the last week. We're certainly grateful that we've now gotten 6 Americans out, but I don't have additional information on this individual or where she might be or what her condition is.
Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and earlier with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid. Apart from condemning the recent Jerusalem attack in the meeting, Mr. Blinken also confirmed that Israel and Hamas had entered the 7th day of a humanitarian pause that had been intended to last for 4 days. Earlier on Thursday, Israel and Hamas struck a last-minute agreement to extend their ceasefire in Gaza to Thursday to allow negotiators to keep working on deals to swap hostages held in the coastal enclave for Palestinian prisoners.
Yoav, first, I should say, again, this day started off in a terrible and very negative way with another terrorist attack that took the lives of innocent Israelis in Jerusalem. A reminder of what Israel and what every Israeli citizen has to face every day. We condemn it, and we also mourn the loss of these innocent lives as we mourn the loss of any innocent life. At the same time, this was the 7th day of the humanitarian pause, the 7th day of hostages coming home to their loved ones. And I know that for Israel, for the United States, for a number of other countries around the world who have their citizens being held hostage by Hamas, we want every hostage to come home.
Now, Chief Israeli military spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari is still voicing skepticism about a Hamas statement that 3 members of an Israeli family taken hostage in Gaza had been killed, saying it's still not verified. Hamas said on Wednesday that Shira Bibas and her young sons, Kefir and Ariel, died in an Israeli airstrike on Thursday. It disseminated footage of Yarden Bibas, Shira's husband, and the boy's father begging to be repatriated with their bodies. Hagari, in a televised briefing, described the video as cruel and harsh form of psychological warfare by the Palestinian terrorist group. Israel's President Isaac Herzog has met with the President of the UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed, on the sidelines of COP28 in Dubai. Delegates from nearly 200 countries are convened for this week for the annual climate summit from November the 30th to December the 12th. Still ahead, MSF decries situation in Gaza as unimaginable and inhumane. We'll have that story and more after the break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Channels Television's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. Now we're turning our attention to a conversation to shed more light on the current situations and the goings-on in the Middle East and the conflict and the war we're discussing with our guest, a military strategist and a former commander, 4 Mechanized Brigade, Benin City, Major General Pat Akimvenga. Major General Akimvenga was also commander 4 and 9 brigades, commander, Special Task Force in Plateau State, and Provost Marshal of the Army. He joins us here in the studio. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Now, let's start with the incident that occurred in Jerusalem. What does this say of the relation between Hamas and the IDF and the Israeli government? Why would you, in the middle of a military pause where there's exchange of prisoners and hostages and a gentleman's agreement, because that's what we can call it, have terrorists attack civilians in Jerusalem? And at the end of that incident, where 3 civilians were killed, you call those acts as heroic on the part of the people who are involved, who are not even Hamas operatives, but who are affiliated with Hamas.
Okay, so you are basically dealing with a group of people who really do not care much about procedures, about international norms, about peace efforts. They want that kind of process to go on. And it's ideologically driven. Once ideology and religion intertwine, passions, so you have uncontrollable elements like that within Hamas. Hamas even later on owned up that they were their guys. So is the normal passions, religious sentiments, basically driving the narrative. So that's it.
Does Hamas want to be taken seriously? Because at the end of the October 7 attack, the terror attack that resulted in over 1,400 people losing their lives, and now over 200 people, and even more than that, who have been taken hostages, some released now, they said it was a military operation. And if I am to quote one of a Hamas official or a Hamas spokesman, he says that their demands include that they want all the prisoners in the Israeli prison system to be released, and they want a ceasefire.
Okay, so Hamas has actually been winning the public relations campaign. People have literally forgotten that there were horrific attacks on the 7th of October. And if you go to the algorithms on TikTok, they've actually been designed in such a way that if you Google anything on this world, all you get is the atrocities being committed by Israel. So Hamas does not play fair. And basically you understand, they feel that we'll be under occupation for long. And that's normally at the forefront, despite the efforts that have been made, even by Israel, to afford them the two-state solution that they wanted. So we are dealing with people who are unpredictable. You are dealing with an organization that has been tagged a terrorist organization. So when you are dealing with people like that and you are negotiating, you must have at the back of your mind that things may not go the way they have been agreed upon. So that is what is playing out. The more atrocities they commit, the more heroic they look to their comrades and even some Palestinians. So you are not dealing with people who keep to the rules, who keep to terms of agreement. So that is why it is like that.
Hamas is a militia. They're not even an army.
Yeah, but they are in governance.
And they're in governance.
They've been governing for over 14 years.
Indeed.
Indeed, yeah.
So I'm referring now to what is now called the armed wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigade.
Yeah.
So they're essentially a militia.
They are.
How do you think then that they were able to prosecute this enterprise without the help of Iran? if that was the case, and succeed to this point and continue to have those weapons that they do have now and continue to have the training that resulted in the October 7 attack.
Okay, so you see, Hamas has been governing the Palestinians for long. And all the support that comes in by way of money and logistics are controlled by them. As a matter of fact, it got out just yesterday, that all the plans to execute that thing they did on the 7th of October were known by the Israeli security forces. But they waved it off. That is too outlandish. That there's no way these guys can implement this kind of thing. To swarm the place with drones, come in waves, and so they said it won't happen. It's not going to happen. So they didn't take it seriously. So you are dealing with this. These people have been preparing for long. They've been preparing for this kind of war for long. And like when you talk about Hamas and the militia, you are talking about the same entity. There's no distinction. It's the same entity. If right now, if you hear a director of something, medical director or whatever speak, you are listening to Hamas. So they control the government. They are interwoven within the society. Virtually every family has a Hamas person. So basically, you are dealing with an organization that is well organized, that is determined to inflict pain, that wants its objectives achieved by all means and any means. So you are not dealing with a group that looks rational, even though they know what they're doing. You are not dealing with people that, I mean, if you keep children in the presence of their parents and keep parents in the presence of children, it means that humanity that makes people do things with a sense of, with a humane face is completely out.
Major General, that's a very grave allegation if it is proven to be true. They have credible, you mentioned that they had intelligence that it was going to happen on that scale, and they ignored it. What I had found out was that Egypt had given them some sort of heads up that there was something big coming.
I think in the next couple of days it will come out very clearly, because I saw it yesterday in one of the news where I was reading on Twitter and some other places. So it will come out very clearly. Okay, but there were major failings. There were truly major failings. And like I said the last time I appeared here, I said Netanyahu bears the brunt of the blame because he caused a lot of distraction within Israel, trying to stave off the wave of corruption allegations and the criminal process that was going on. He decided to attack the Supreme Court to reduce his powers and divided the nation to the extent that the military forces and veterans and those who normally will mobilize to fight, were saying, when next there is a war, we are not going to participate in it. Well, the only reason why they came back was because of the horrific nature of the attacks on.
So you're referring obviously to the judicial overhaul
that
resulted in many
it divided the country. There were protests
prior to October 7th.
Took their eyes off the ball.
It will be very uncharacteristic of Hamas, I beg your pardon, of Mossad to make that sort of mistake. Were it proven to be true, there'll have to be some sort of overhaul. But you don't start to lay blame on a person who's just lost loved ones. That was big at the outset of this war. Israel came together as a family and said, we're not going to look at who was wrong and who dropped the ball. We want to take care of the situation, because they haven't had time to mourn the death of the people on October 7 before hostages were taken. And that drove the sentiment of the swords of iron that they have undertaken at this juncture. With your combat experience and with the military experience, now that the hostilities have resumed as at today, what sort of warfare can you paint for us the picture? We know it's urban, we know it's close quarters, we know it's in Gaza. Will the IDF face as they try to extricate the Hamas terrorists from their enclave?
A couple of things are playing out right now. When you are in intense combat like they were a couple of days back, and then you are forced by this kind of circumstance to pause, the momentum that you were driving the war kind of slows down. So you will need, and then pent-up fury and anger, that warrior ethos that comes as a result of patriotic zeal, as a result of the activities of Hamas, kind of wanes. Troops become a little bit, because they've disengaged from war, you will need to build up momentum again. And then you recall that they're actually going to be fighting in the south now, because the north has been dealt with. And while that was going on, they told the civilians, those who were non-combatants, to move to the south. And in the process of that, Hamas elements and leadership moved along. So now you are going to be doing surgical operations that will be calibrated to avoid collateral damage and mass casualties. It's because there have been a lot of outcry that the munitions and the kind of war that Israel has waged has not been designed in a way to take care of the normal norms that international humanitarian law accepts. The principle of proportionality, the principle of humanity, the principle of distinction which makes a distinction between those who are combatants and those who are civilians, those who are all the combat, those who have either been injured and are no longer effective. The word is saying they have not been observed strictly. So America has been pressing Israel that in this second phase that is going to resume, that has already resumed, it will be targeted to the south, and they've seen the scale of destruction in the north, where streets have been, houses have been leveled in wide areas. So they're saying conduct an operation in such a way that it is surgical, so that collateral damage is reduced, and that is going to be very challenging because normally fighting in built-up areas is always very challenging. You will have people hiding, snipers hiding in buildings and picking up troops as they're coming. So it's going to be very, very difficult. But you must have one thing at the back of your mind. Israel will keep fighting. If I may extend, I'll tell you that when Netanyahu says Hamas leaders are dead men walking, they mean it. If you recall 1972, the Olympics, where 11 Israeli athletes were killed by Palestinian terrorists. They sought out, it was Golda Meir was the prime minister. They sought out those guys, no matter how long it took, they killed them one after the other in various countries.
Indeed.
So they are going to execute it.
That's how Mossad got their reputation.
Yeah, they are going to execute it.
And also the way they got some Nazi war criminals after World War II, years after.
They are still pursuing, if there is anyone alive, they are still pursuing the person. These guys are good at what they do.
Right, and if they are that good, then, well, before we turn to that aspect again of the intelligence failure, let's stay for a moment in Gaza. You mentioned how surgical an operation it has to be, and we obviously heard from the Secretary of State, U.S. Anthony Blinken, saying that they must make due preparation for minimal or no loss of life of innocent civilians. But how practical is this?
It's impossible.
I want you to tell us, because Hamas don't even wear uniforms. Some of them don't wear uniforms. They've been accused of that.
You got it.
It's a war crime. You're not wearing uniforms, and you know that the people, your people, that is the Gaza, the Palestinians, are not wearing uniforms. So they're fair game for the IDF. Yeah.
So it's difficult to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants when the people you are fighting are not wearing uniforms, are not carrying are not putting on distinctive emblems or things that can distinguish them from the civilian population. So Israel is dealing with a very difficult hand. And the public opinion is basically against them no matter how they do it. I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, there was a demonstration on the streets of London. And some journalists were interviewing the young people, students who were very passionate and crying and shouting. They said, do you know that Hamas killed people on the 7th of October? They said, we've never heard of that. It's not true. So you can imagine the kind of hand they are dealing with. Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. And Hamas deliberately situates itself within civilian populations. So that if you attack them, you are attacking civilians. So Israel has a very difficult hand. Normally in combat, you cannot rule out collateral damage. You cannot rule out innocent lives dying. But if Israel wages this war in the manner they want to wage it, the collateral damage will be huge, and the outcry will continue. But I can assure you that they are determined. They feel that thing that happened on the 7th of October, that if there is no corresponding response that serves as a deterrence to others, that they are actually facing an existential threat, and that they will cease to exist as a nation. And so that is driving it. But again, there are debates within Israel itself. Some are saying Netanyahu should have gone already. So the right wing that feels war must continue, and then the doves, the people who feel there should be peace, so they are being talked to two directions. The government is being talked to two different opposing directions. But I can assure you, they will continue the war. They will turn a deaf ear to the cries of collateral damage because it's a job they must do.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may be some things in some eyes of some people, but you can't call him unpatriotic.
No, definitely not.
His sixth premiership that he came back and became Prime Minister for the 6th time, he says in his own words that he did it because of fear of Iran. Well, not really not fear of Iran, but consideration of the threat that Iran poses to Israel. Because he has a very good understanding of what we obviously know what happened with his brother, Yoni Netanyahu, how he was an example of heroism for Israelis after the Entebbe enterprise, where he perished, but those kidnapped victims were rescued. That at this juncture, it's not because his intentions, his motives are pure and honest for the Israeli people, but possibly he's going about things the wrong way.
Well, is he going about things the wrong way? It's the normal reaction. If you were Prime Minister of Israel and this thing happened, it would be the same reaction. You'll be driven by forces beyond your control.
Okay, I want to bring up another point before you continue. If Israelis had a right to carry firearms, like in the United States, you could get licensed firearms for civilians, and was part of their constitution, would that have minimized or even made the October 7 massacre a failure?
Well, there would have been some pushback, but because of the way the Palestinians came in waves, it would have been difficult to hold them back. What you needed were real military forces supported by communications who could call down fire where needed. So if you only had people with rifles, it wouldn't have made much of a difference. They would have killed a couple of guys, but they'll be killed. You are fighting people that are prepared to die. They don't care too much about life. You are fighting a group of people that think that if they die, it is heroic.
Do you think that Israel should have, Israeli civilians should have a right to bear arms now, going forward, as part of because of the environment in which they are?
They do not, Israel does not really have challenges with carrying arms. You don't necessarily have to have everybody carrying arms. Everybody in Israel is a soldier.
But in the kibbutzes, Major General, in the kibbutzes where most of those massacres happened, it was because they had no arms.
Yeah, but
the kibbutzes are known to those locals who know those areas. The only reason why some of them perished was because they couldn't shoot at the aggressors when they were coming into their houses. They saw them coming.
That's the point I'm making, that they would have taken out some elements of the attackers, but that wouldn't have prevented them from being overrun and being killed, because these people planned, they were coming in waves. Some were on machines, and while that was going on, drones were being fired, rockets were flying. So it would have been, yeah, you would take out some few guys, but in the end, you will die. See, so Israel doesn't really have a problem with that. In Israel, everybody serves. Everybody serves. Everybody's on reserve until you get to a certain age where it becomes virtually impossible. Everybody serves. So all you need to do is to mobilize them quickly. And they've done that multiple times in the past. You remember the Yom Kippur War?
Yes.
It was on the day of Yom Kippur when everybody was at rest, and yet they mobilized to fight and win. So Israel has no problem with mobilizing people. You see, the challenge with having nations awash with weapons is that it becomes everything goes. I'll give you an example. One time, one guy saw a guy in US with a rifle, a gun that he liked. He was carrying a gun. The other guy he saw him he pointed the gun and collected it. So you're getting to a place where it becomes like a place that is ungovernable. It becomes where everybody becomes a law to himself. So I will not advocate for everybody in a nation carrying arms like the Americans have been doing.
It's an ongoing debate there. It's a very thorny issue. But it's part of what makes the United States what it is.
So, and you have seen the gun violence. You have seen the killings.
It's not a lawless society.
It's not lawless in that they enforce laws. In that if you kill, you'll be arrested or you'll be killed. You will go through the court processes. But when you have a situation where there are some states in America that open carry states. You carry your weapons openly. Now, when you are carrying weapons, accidents happen. Yes. Provocations. Somebody horns at your back. You get irritated, you come out shooting. Somebody enters a school, kills children. You have people with mental cases who perhaps are able to get weapons, so you endanger everybody.
The argument for that is background checks.
Yeah, but it's not been very effective.
Well, yes, that is true.
And virtually unenforceable in some places.
Right. But now back to Israel, lest we digress. You mentioned that most Israelis are trained. There was a case of a kibbutz, the only one on October 7th that didn't suffer any loss of life, didn't suffer any injury. didn't suffer the infiltration of the terrorists that came to all the kibbutzes, only one. And that was because, according to reports of the actions of a female 26-year-old soldier who wasn't even in the army at the time, but she was in charge of the security of the kibbutz. And she organized the 12 other people in that kibbutz, near Am, I believe, to repel, and she held that station for 3 hours. Shooting the Hamas terrorists that came, until the army came and guaranteed the lives of everyone at that kibbutz. And that was a woman. What role, also speak about the role of women in the Israeli army and in this conflict?
Well, you know, the women fight like men. Some of their fighter pilots are women. They are trained to fight. They are good. But you see, normally when you are doing a study of how something succeeded, that appears to be an outlier. One instance is not enough for us to replicate it and extrapolate and say, well, it would have happened like this if everybody had. See, let's take it for what it was. The Israelis, the intelligence, the armed forces, everybody dropped the ball. And these things happen. When you are dealing with Israel, there is always a spiritual element. Sometimes they go far off, and God permits things like this to happen to bring them back to himself. Because if you look at, there is no explanation under the sun for a nation with the level of intelligence they have, for a nation that is constantly on alert, for a nation that is always looking out for danger, for this thing to have happened is unexplainable. It's inexplicable. You can't rationalize. You can't explain it. It's challenging. So those of us who have security backgrounds have found it very difficult to wrap our heads around it, especially when there were hints, either from Egypt or from the Americas. There were hints that something like this was going to happen. And yet it happened.
I think I can help you bring that conversation home for our viewers, where, for instance, the question to you, therefore, will be, has Israel become so secular and so westernized that the core values of the Jews as a people have been simmered down to the point that it's affecting them as a people? My point being that you cannot extrapolate, you cannot extricate, you can't separate the Jewish people and their position in the Middle East and that land that is under dispute and where all of this is going on from the origins of the Jewish people. The very name Jew comes from Judah. Judah was one of the sons of Jacob.
You are doing well.
Because it's in a secular society. It tends to, okay, so that's a religious argument. Is it really a religious argument where from Judah we find that these are the sons of Jacob, and Jacob's name is Israel. Israel, the very name, came from the son of Isaac. And Isaac was the promised son to Abraham, the father of all the Jews. So now if they are living, I'm taking it to the point that if we go by the origin of the Jews, it goes to the point that God gave them the land and says that if you go outside my laws, this and this and this is what is going to happen. And everything that is happening has already been predicted to happen. It's in the Torah.
So you are doing well.
In the Bible.
Okay, you are doing well because so you were virtually talking about Genesis chapter 32 from verse 26 down to 32. Where the man's name was changed because you see he spent the night virtually wrestling with God. His twin brother from whom he had collected the blessings and the firstborn rights was coming against him with 400 men, and he panicked. So he spent a night desperately seeking intervention and got an intervention, wrestled with God, and then got his name changed to Israel, and was promised that out of you a nation will be born. So Israel is not an accident. It was created by God. But back to the discourse, there has been a major struggle between two strands of the Israeli society. There are the Orthodox Jews who feel that the nation is becoming too secular, who even uphold democratic norms. They feel that this democracy is watering down the nation, that the nation was designed to be distinct, that is being watered down, that is being contaminated, so to speak. So that debate is on, and this war has even given vent and impetus to the debate. It's ongoing right now. When it is all over, Israel will do there will be a lot of work done.
Politically, soul searching.
Yes, politically and otherwise to get to. Well, maybe we'll
have to leave it there.
In the end, they will find themselves.
We'll have to leave it there. I mentioned it because when you mentioned it, because the Israeli government spokesperson Elion Levi was trying to describe some of the antics of Hamas, and in the middle of his presentation, he used Game of Thrones to describe it. Game of Thrones, come on. Even I've never heard. It's possible that may have happened, but I've hardly heard any of the United States Americans themselves use that as an analogy to describe what's happening in certain cases. But we thank you so much for your contribution and your presence personally in the studio.
Thank you so much.
This morning. Major General Patrick Kemvinga, military strategist, former commander, full mechanized brigade, Benin City, who joined us here in Lagos. Many thanks, sir.
Thank you so much.
You're watching coverage of Israel-Hamas war coming up on the program. Lebanese farmers rush to plant crops during lull in fighting. More details later. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Israel's military says 6 more Israeli hostages held in Gaza were handed over to the Red Cross and were on their way to Israeli territory, bringing the total release to 8 on Thursday. Earlier on Thursday, Hamas handed over 2 female hostages to the Red Cross. Palestinians in Ramallah greeted the prisoners who were released as part of the hostage prisoner swap between Israel and Hamas. After arriving in the West Bank, the released prisoners described the bad conditions they faced inside Israel jails following the October 7 attacks by Hamas. They say the situation inside the prison is not normal. It's a tragedy. It's like a ghost life. The Israel Prison Service reports that it freed 30 Palestinians from Israel jails in the 7th such release under a truce arrangement with Gaza's Hamas group. Thursday's releases brought the total freed under the pause in fighting to 105 hostages and 240 Palestinian prisoners. Amongst the newly released are 6 women, aged 21 to 40, including 1 Mexican, Israeli, dual national, and 21-year-old Maya Shem, who holds both French and Israeli citizenship. Released Israeli hostage Ophir Engel was kept in an apartment and transferred many times during his captivity in Gaza, according to a relative of the 17-year-old. Engel was among 16 hostages released by Hamas from Gaza on Wednesday, 54 days after he was kidnapped from the kibbutz Be'eri on October the 7th. The teenager's aunt, Yael Engel Nishi, said he appeared thin and pale, and wanted to be in fresh air since his release. Another hostage, Raymond Kirsch, 36 years of age, was released a day earlier on Tuesday after she was taken captive with her husband, Yegev Boshtab. Kirsch's cousin, Shani Segal, says the couple had been held together throughout the whole 53-day ordeal until Kirsch was released without her husband. Segal described her cousin as now being half a person and with a heart in Gaza, as long as her husband remains a captive. The international president of the Médecins Sans Frontières, Christophe Christou, has held a press conference in Jordanian capital Amman. He described the situation in Gaza as catastrophic on Thursday after his visit to the Palestinian territories. The pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas around hostage and prisoner releases has allowed substantially more aid into Gaza over the past 6 days, but deliveries of relief, including food, water, medical supplies, and fuel, remain far below what is needed.
For 7 weeks, we saw simply that the Israeli forces were killing people, children, entire families, and they are doing it wantonly. People trying to escape unpredictable bombardment, trying to find safety in a place where nowhere was safe. And now, over 1.7 million people are displaced, and they are living in the most cramped, chaotic, horrific conditions. This is unimaginable. This is inhumane. The situation today in Gaza, as you all are aware of, is catastrophic. It has gone beyond what we call humanitarian crisis. It is a humanitarian catastrophe. At last count, nearly 3/4 of the hospitals in the Gaza Strip are not functioning. Almost none in northern Gaza are functioning. And systematic attacks have destroyed the healthcare system. This brutal annihilation of an entire population's health system stretches beyond what humanitarian aid can fix. I have to make it very clear, doctors cannot stop bombs. Ceasefire. We are already witnessing a humanitarian crisis with catastrophic proportions, and it will get worse if this violent onslaught resumes. People in Gaza need a sustained ceasefire now, and it is the only way to stop indiscriminate killings and civilian injuries and allow for the delivery of all this desperately needed humanitarian aid on a meaningful scale.
Villagers who live off the land in South Lebanon are rushing to sow their crops, making up for lost time after weeks of hostilities with Israel forced them to miss the start of the planting season. Zainab Zuwaydin says she lives from farming as she sowed wheat in the village of Yatir, in an area hit by Israeli strikes during heavy exchange of fire with Lebanon's Hezbollah. After enduring its worst violence since the 2006 war, the area has been largely calm since Israel and Hamas agreed a temporary pause in fighting they've been waging in that war 200 kilometers away in and around Gaza. That war, which began on October the 7th, quickly spilled into Lebanon with the Iran-backed Hezbollah rocketing Israeli positions at the border and Israel launching air and artillery strikes in response. Israel and Hamas agreed to extend the truce by 1 day, bringing a 7th day of respite. As a drone buzzed in the sky above her, Suwaiden says she had stayed in her home throughout the hostilities, even after it sustained some damage. The crops should have been planted at the start of November, but she hopes the delay would not affect the yield. Farming their land has become even more important for many in Lebanon since the economy there collapsed in a devastating financial meltdown more than 4 years ago. And finally, further Israeli hostages arrived at the Sheba Medical Center near Tel Aviv early today, following their release from Hamas captivity in Gaza. Hamas released 8 Israeli hostages under a last-minute extension of the pause in fighting, and Israel freed 30 Palestinian prisoners as negotiators sought to renew the pause in fighting again, while Israel required Hamas to release 10 hostages daily to continue their Qatari-mediated truce. A Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson says there will be no more hostages freed beyond the 8 at this time. And the conflict in the Middle East continues. And that's where we leave it for today. That is for this morning on our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Please stay with Channels Television for all of the news, all of the time.